It's strange, isn't it? Sometimes life looks perfectly fine from the outside, yet inside, something feels slightly off, as if the heart has lost its balance without telling anyone. Nothing dramatic has happened. No great storm, no clear problem. And still, a quiet restlessness lingers, like water that refuses to become still. Most people believe balance comes from fixing everything around them. Solve the problem, answer the message, clear the misunderstanding, push life back into order. But here's the curious part. The more we try to control every ripple, the more stirred the water inside us seems to become. There's a quieter truth that many people overlook. Balance doesn't return because we force life to calm down. It returns when something inside us finally stops shaking the glass. In this story, you'll meet someone who discovered this in the most unexpected way, through a tiny snow globe, a quiet park bench, and a simple moment of stillness that changed the way he carried the world. And if you stay with this story for a few minutes, you might begin to notice something surprising. The calm you've been searching for may already be waiting beneath the swirling flakes. Some evenings, when the day finally quiets down, Daniel would sit by the window and feel something he couldn't quite name. On paper, life looked steady enough, work was fine, the bills were paid, and nothing dramatic had happened. Yet inside, there was a faint wobble, like a chair leg that never quite touched the floor. He'd breathe out slowly and wonder, why do I still feel unsettled? It wasn't loud distress, just a soft, persistent imbalance. During the day, he kept moving, as most people do. Messages, small obligations, quick conversations that barely left space for silence. But every now and then, between tasks, he noticed a strange drift inside himself. A comment from someone would linger longer than it should. A small disappointment would echo quietly in his chest. It was as if his emotions had been nudged slightly off-center. One afternoon, after a particularly restless day, Daniel found an old snow globe on a shelf in his apartment. He picked it up absent-mindedly and gave it a shake. Tiny flakes burst into a swirling storm inside the glass. For a moment he watched it, almost amused. Then something about it felt oddly familiar. The flakes spun wildly, colliding, tumbling over one another in chaotic motion. The little house inside the globe was barely visible through the storm. Daniel tilted his head slightly. Well, that looks about right, he murmured to himself with a faint smile. Not tragic, not catastrophic, just stirred up all the time. He placed the globe on the table, but couldn't help glancing at it again. The flakes were still racing through the water, refusing to settle, and somewhere deep down, a quiet thought began to form, soft and curious. If even a small world inside glass could be shaken into chaos so easily, what would it take for a restless spirit to become still again? The next morning, Daniel noticed the snow globe again while preparing his coffee. The flakes had completely settled overnight, resting gently over the tiny house and trees inside. The water looked perfectly clear now, calm as a quiet pond at dawn. For a moment, he simply stood there watching it. Interesting, he thought softly, almost amused by the change. It struck him that nothing inside the globe had tried to fix itself. The flakes hadn't rushed around trying to find their place. They hadn't organized themselves or pushed one another aside. They had simply stopped moving, and in that stillness, order had quietly returned. Daniel leaned on the counter and let that thought linger for a while. Perhaps balance worked in a similar way. Maybe harmony didn't come from forcing life into shape, or solving every emotional ripple the moment it appeared. Maybe, just maybe, balance was something that emerged when the inner storm finally slowed down. He began to notice how often his mind reacted like the shaken globe. A rude comment from a coworker could send thoughts spinning. A delayed message from a friend could stir doubt and quiet insecurity. The spirit, he realized, was constantly being shaken by small moments that seemed harmless at first. And as he stood there watching the still globe on the table, another gentle question drifted through his mind. If peace appeared naturally once the flakes stopped swirling, what might happen if the spirit itself learned how to settle? That same week, Daniel began to notice how scattered he had quietly become. Not in an obvious way. He still showed up to work, still answered messages, still smiled when people expected it. But inside, something felt frayed around the edges. His attention jumped from one thought to another like a restless bird that couldn't quite land. And even in quiet moments, there was a faint tension humming beneath the surface. One evening at dinner with friends, someone made a careless joke about his job. It was harmless, really. Everyone laughed, including Daniel. Yet later that night, The words replayed in his mind like a song stuck on repeat. Why did that bother me so much, he wondered, staring at the ceiling while the room sat dark and still. The next morning brought the same subtle heaviness. Notifications chimed, conversations overlapped, and small decisions piled up one after another. By lunchtime, his thoughts felt noisy, like a crowded room where everyone talked at once. He caught himself sighing without realizing it. Something inside him felt tired in a way that sleep didn't seem to fix. Later that evening, he picked up the snow globe again and gave it a gentle shake. The flakes erupted into motion instantly, swirling in frantic little circles. Daniel watched them with a quiet frown. "That's exactly how it feels," he murmured, half amused, half uneasy. Always moving, always stirred. For a brief moment, a quiet worry surfaced. What if this constant inner turbulence had become permanent? What if he had somehow drifted too far from the calm center he used to feel years ago? The flakes kept spinning wildly inside the glass, and Daniel couldn't help wondering whether some storms ever truly settled. A few days later, Daniel found himself watching the snow globe again, this time with more attention than before. He lifted it slowly, turning the glass in the morning light. The tiny house inside looked peaceful, almost stubbornly calm, even though the flakes around it had been stirred countless times. Something about that quiet little scene felt strangely comforting. Out of curiosity, he shook the globe once more. Instantly, the flakes leapt into motion, spinning like a miniature blizzard. The calm village vanished behind a storm of white specks. Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, that didn't take much," he muttered, noticing how little effort it took to turn stillness into chaos. He placed the globe on the table and watched the tiny storm swirl around. It reminded him of moments in his own life, the quick flare of irritation after a sharp comment, the heaviness that followed rejection, the quiet sting of disappointment when plans fell apart. Each feeling, like the flakes, seemed harmless at first, but together they created a cloudy storm. The more he looked, the more the snow globe felt like a mirror. The little world inside wasn't broken. It was simply disturbed again and again. Every shake sent the flakes flying. Every movement kept the water unsettled. And somehow, Daniel had been living inside that same constant stirring. He leaned back in his chair and folded his arms, watching the flakes refuse to settle just yet. A curious thought began forming quietly in his mind. If disturbance created the storm, perhaps something, or someone out there, understood how to let the water become still again. A few evenings later, Daniel wandered into a small park near his apartment, the kind of place people pass through without really noticing. The air carried that quiet softness just before sunset. An older man sat on a wooden bench feeding small crumbs to a few birds hopping near his feet. There was nothing remarkable about him at first glance, yet something about his stillness felt steady. Daniel sat on the far end of the bench, holding the snow globe he had absent-mindedly brought along in his bag. He turned it in his hands while staring at the fading light through the trees. The old man glanced at it and smiled gently, the kind of smile that didn't rush to fill silence. "Ah," he said quietly, nodding toward the globe. "A tiny storm in your pocket." Daniel chuckled softly, a little surprised. "Feels about right," he admitted. "Some days my mind looks exactly like this thing after a shake." Without thinking, he gave the globe a quick swirl. The flakes erupted again, spinning wildly through the glass. The older man watched calmly, as if storms inside snow globes were nothing unusual. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The man simply waited, patient as the evening breeze moving through the trees. Daniel noticed how relaxed the stranger seemed, as if the world moved slower around him. It wasn't that he was doing anything special. He was just present. Finally, the man gestured lightly toward the swirling flakes. "Most people," he said softly, "try to fix the storm while it's still spinning." His eyes followed the drifting particles inside the glass. But balance doesn't return through more movement. He paused, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. It returns when something finally allows the water to rest. Daniel turned the snow globe slowly between his palms, while the flakes continued their restless dance. The old man watched without urgency, as if time itself had loosened its grip around him. After a moment, he gently reached out and tapped the wooden bench. "Place it here," he said softly. Daniel set the globe down between them. The storm inside still swirled, flakes darting in every direction. Instinctively, Daniel leaned closer, almost as if trying to see through the chaos. The old man smiled faintly. "You see how hard it is to find the little house while everything is moving?" Daniel nodded. It's impossible, actually. The mentor gave a small shrug. That's what people try to do with their emotions. They search for clarity while shaking the globe at the same time. The old man rested his hands loosely on his knees and said nothing for a while. The park grew quieter, and the birds began settling into the trees. Daniel noticed that the flakes inside the globe had started slowing on their own. No effort, no fixing, just gravity doing its quiet work. Balance, the mentor said gently, doesn't arrive because we control the storm. It arrives because we stop feeding it. He pointed lightly toward the globe. When the shaking stops, the world inside remembers how to settle. Daniel watched the flakes drifting downward. Softer now, calmer. Something about the moment felt oddly relieving, as if a door had opened somewhere inside him, though he wasn't quite sure yet what it meant to walk through it. The following morning, Daniel woke up with the snow globe still resting on his table. Sunlight slipped through the window and touched the glass softly. For a moment, he simply looked at it, remembering the quiet lesson from the park. The flakes were perfectly settled again, like a gentle blanket over the tiny house. He inhaled slowly, then let the breath leave just as slowly. Later that day, when a sharp email from a coworker landed in his inbox, the familiar stir began inside his chest. His thoughts rushed forward, ready to react, but Daniel paused. Just a small pause, nothing dramatic. He placed one hand lightly on the desk, breathed in once, and imagined the snow globe in his mind, untouched. The urge to respond quickly softened, not vanished, just softened. The storm inside didn't disappear instantly, but it stopped spinning quite so wildly. Daniel leaned back in his chair and allowed a few quiet seconds to pass. Let it settle, he whispered to himself with a small, amused smile. Over the next few days, he practiced these tiny pauses in ordinary moments. A rude tone at the grocery store, a delayed message from a friend, a wave of self-doubt late at night. Each time, he pictured the flakes slowly drifting downward inside the globe. Sometimes he even placed the real globe in front of him and simply watched. Gradually, something unexpected began happening. The inner storms still appeared, but they didn't last as long. The flakes seemed to fall faster now, revealing that little house again and again. And somewhere in that quiet clearing, Daniel started sensing a steady center he hadn't felt in a long while, though he was only just beginning to trust it. A week later, Daniel noticed something subtle had changed. Not the world around him. The same rushed mornings, the same unpredictable conversations, the same occasional sharp words drifting through ordinary days. But inside, the shaking seemed gentler now. The snow globe still sat on his table, catching light in quiet moments like an old friend who didn't need many words. One afternoon at work, a colleague criticized a project Daniel had spent hours preparing. A few weeks earlier, that moment would have stirred a storm instantly. Thoughts would rush in, sharp and defensive. But this time, Daniel felt the first flakes begin to swirl, and then he remembered. He let his breath slow for a moment. In his mind, he saw the snow globe resting calmly on the table, the flakes drifting down, the tiny house standing quietly beneath them. Instead of reacting, he simply nodded and said, "That's helpful to think about." The room didn't collapse. The world didn't tilt. The moment passed like a small wave against a steady shore. Later that evening, while waiting in line at a crowded cafe, he noticed a stranger snapping impatiently at the cashier. The old Daniel might have carried that tension home without realizing it, but now he stood quietly, feeling the rhythm of his breathing. The storm wasn't his to carry, and something curious began happening around him. Conversations softened. People lingered longer in his calm presence. Even difficult moments seemed to move differently when he stayed steady. It was as if the stillness inside him quietly invited the world to slow down too, though Daniel had yet to discover how deeply that calm could reach. One quiet night, Daniel sat again by the window with the snow globe resting in his hands. The room was dim, the kind of gentle darkness that makes the world feel softer around the edges. Outside, a few distant lights blinked through the evening air. He turned the globe slowly, watching the tiny house inside the clear water. Out of habit, he gave it the smallest shake. The flakes lifted, swirling lazily this time, not the frantic storm he once noticed. Daniel smiled faintly. "Still learning," he murmured to himself. Then he placed the globe on the table and simply watched. As the flakes drifted downward, he tried something simple. He closed his eyes and drew in one slow breath through his nose. Not a forced breath, not a dramatic one. Just a calm inhale that filled his chest, gently. Then he let the air leave his lungs, just as slowly. In his mind, he imagined the same snow globe resting quietly inside his chest. The swirling flakes represented every criticism, every awkward moment, every lonely thought that had shaken him that day. Instead of chasing them away, he just let them fall naturally. For a minute or so, Daniel stayed there with his breathing and the quiet image of settling flakes. When he opened his eyes, the snow globe on the table had almost cleared. The little house stood visible again, and Daniel had the quiet feeling that perhaps this tiny practice might help someone else remember how to settle too. A few days later, Daniel found himself back in the small park where he had first met the old man. The same wooden bench waited quietly beneath the trees. Evening light filtered through the branches, soft and golden. He sat down slowly, the snow globe resting in his hands, and for a while he simply watched the world move around him. People hurried along the paths. A child laughed somewhere in the distance. A dog barked, then settled again beside its owner. Life was still full of movement, just as it had always been. Yet Daniel noticed something different inside himself, an anchor where there had once been only drifting. He turned the snow globe gently, but this time he didn't shake it. The flakes rested peacefully over the tiny house. The water inside was so clear it almost looked like air. Daniel smiled faintly, realizing something simple he had somehow missed for years. Balance, he understood now, had never been something he needed to chase. It wasn't waiting somewhere far away, hidden behind the next solution or the next perfect day. It had always lived in the quiet space that appeared when the shaking stopped. And as the evening breeze passed softly through the park, the globe rested calmly in his palms, its tiny world steady, clear, and undisturbed. Much like the quiet center Daniel had begun to rediscover within himself, a place that could remain still even while life continued to move all around it.